right this second. If you were paddling a kayak through the Strait of Gibraltar on a clear afternoon, you wouldn't hear anything coming. You'd be watching the horizon, maybe checking the weather. Then the stern of your boat would simply stop responding. Something below the waterline, something weighing 4 tons, would be gripping your rudder and turning it. Not breaking it, turning it. Deliberately. Orca, the killer whale, can hold its breath for 15 minutes, reach 56 kilometers per hour, and coordinate hunting strategies across pods in real time. For 35 million years, it has been the apex predator of every ocean on Earth. And since May 2020, a small group of them has been doing something no marine biologist predicted. Something they cannot fully explain. Something that has now sunk 6 boats and left the world's best cetacean researchers arguing about whether these animals are playing, or whether we've crossed a line we didn't know existed. In the next 25 minutes, you're going to learn 3 things that will change how you think about the animals sharing this planet with you. First, there are 8 documented animal attacks so behaviorally strange, so outside what science predicted, that researchers are still filing papers trying to explain them. One of them happened in your lifetime. Several happened in the last 5 years. Second, one of those animals killed a man who had spent his entire career handling the most dangerous creatures on Earth, and the animal that killed him was considered gentle. Third, and most unsettling, your body already knows these animals. It has known them for millions of years. Your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, fires faster in response to animals than it does to human faces. You carry the memory of predators in the architecture of your own neurons. You are not built to feel safe out here. Let's begin with what the data actually shows. In 2022, marine biologist Alfredo Lopez of the Atlantic Orca Working Group, GTOA, published a detailed photographic analysis of interactions between orca and sailing vessels off the Iberian Peninsula. His team identified 31 distinct individuals, 9 of which made direct contact with boats. They named them the Gladises, Gladys Blanca, Gladys Gris, Gladys Negra, Gladys Peak. By late 2023, the number of documented interactions had exceeded 500. By mid-2025, more than 750 encounters had been recorded. Over 250 vessels damaged. At least 6 confirmed sinkings. Here is what makes this scientifically unprecedented. Orcas, in all documented history prior to May 2020, had never shown this behavior. Not in this subpopulation. Not anywhere. The International Whaling Commission convened a special workshop to analyze the reports. Their conclusion, published in 2024, stated there was no evidence the behavior was aggressive in the traditional sense. Quote, "The behavior has more in common with fads seen elsewhere and seems associated with play or socializing." The workshop recommended, essentially, that we wait and observe. But here is what that report quietly acknowledged. No one knows why it started. No one knows which individual initiated it. And no one knows how to stop it. Monica Whelan-Shields, director of the Orca Behavior Institute, offered perhaps the most honest assessment in a PBS NewsHour segment. They're the top predator in the ocean. They're capable of attacking and killing all kinds of species around them. But they have never targeted that talent toward humans. She paused before finishing. And for whatever reason, they still haven't. That, for whatever reason, is doing a great deal of work. What's most important about this case, scientifically, is the transmission mechanism. The behavior spread between pods. Juveniles learned it from adults. That means this is not instinct. It is culture. A learned behavior, passed deliberately through a population, targeting a specific type of vessel, using techniques refined over repeated encounters. That is not animal behavior in the way we traditionally define it. That is something else. April 12, 2019. Alachua, Florida, 10:07 in the morning. Marvin Hajos, 75 years old, a collector of exotic animals, was doing routine work near his property's enclosures. He was breeding cassowaries, Casuarius casuarius, the southern cassowary, native to the rainforests of New Guinea and northeastern Australia. The cassowary is classified by the San Diego Zoo as the most dangerous bird in the world. It stands 1.8 meters tall. It weighs up to 60 kilograms. It can run at 50 kilometers per hour through dense jungle underbrush. It can jump 1.5 meters vertically. It can swim across river crossings that would stop most mammals. Marvin Hajos apparently fell near the enclosure fence, within striking distance. What happened in the next 90 seconds was described by first responders as a sustained attack. The bird did not flee when he went down. It did not treat the fall as an opportunity to escape. It attacked. Hajos called 911 himself. On the recording, obtained by WFT under Florida Public Records Law, his voice is steady but urgent. "Send an ambulance, please." An employee called back minutes later. "I'm sure he got kicked by the cassowary." The autopsy, performed within 24 hours, documented more than a dozen distinct lacerations across his face, neck, back, abdomen, thighs, both legs, and his right arm. The brachial artery, the major vessel of the upper arm, had been severed. That is the wound that killed him, not a single catastrophic strike. A series of precise, repeated kicks from an animal that was still there, still engaged, when the paramedics arrived. Here is what makes this case scientifically notable, beyond the tragedy itself. This was not a wild encounter. This was an animal Hajos knew, an animal that had been in his care. Christopher Coffrin of the Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service documented 221 cassowary attacks in a 1999 study, 150 of them on humans. In the majority of cases, the attacks involved animals that had been fed by or habituated to humans. The cassowary does not distinguish between the person who feeds it and the person who falls down next to it. In the cassowary's perceptual world, a fallen human is an opportunity, not a tragedy. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission classified cassowaries as Class II wildlife, the same category as alligators, honey badgers, and clouded leopards. Class II means capable of serious harm, requires extensive experience to keep. Hajos had that experience. He had kept these animals for years. It didn't matter. What we don't fully understand about the cassowary's attack behavior is why it escalates once a target is on the ground. Other dangerous birds, ostriches, emus, tend to kick and flee. The cassowary stays. Researchers have hypothesized this reflects its evolutionary role as a prey animal in competition with large predators in Papua New Guinea. It learned to press the advantage. It learned that stopping early means dying. Marvin Hajos' last wishes were that his animals be auctioned after his death. The cassowary that killed him was sold at Gulf Coast Livestock Auction. The listing didn't specify a buyer. But here's what nobody tells you about how these animals actually chose their targets. Because in every case we've examined so far, the orcas, the cassowary, there's an assumption buried in the coverage that the attack was reactive. The animal was startled. The animal felt threatened. The animal was provoked in some way we didn't see. That assumption is comfortable. It gives us a framework. It means we can calculate the risk, identify the trigger, avoid the situation. But there are attacks in the scientific literature that don't fit this model at all. Attacks where the animal approached over distance, without provocation, without any identifiable trigger, and the behavior that followed was documented with enough detail that researchers had to file a separate category for it. And in at least 2 of the 8 cases we're covering today, the animal that attacked was not considered dangerous to humans. At all. Your body was not built to survive an encounter with a large predator the way you think it was. You have been told, implicitly, by movies, by survival guides, by your own instincts, that your body responds to danger with fight or flight. Adrenaline, heart rate increase, muscle activation. You become faster. You become stronger. You're ready. Here is what neuroscience actually shows. In 2011, Florian Moorman, then a postdoctoral researcher at Caltech, now at the University of Bonn, published a landmark study in Nature Neuroscience. His team was working with epilepsy patients who had electrodes implanted in their amygdala for seizure monitoring. This gave the researchers direct access to live neural activity in the human brain's fear center. They showed patients photographs, people, buildings, objects, and animals. The result: neurons in the human amygdala respond more strongly to pictures of animals than to pictures of human faces. Not dangerous animals, all animals. A cat, a goldfish, a snake. The right hemisphere of the brain, Moorman noted, seemed to have been evolutionarily shaped to treat animals as the most biologically relevant category of stimulus that exists. Throughout our biological history, Moorman said, animals, which could represent either predators or prey, were a highly relevant class of stimuli. Translation: your brain has a dedicated circuit for this. It has been running that circuit for millions of years. It fires before you consciously register that an animal is present. But here is where it gets complicated, and where your survival instincts fail you. That same amygdala response evolved in a world where the predators you were likely to encounter were large, visible, and slow enough that flight was viable. A lion on the savannah. A crocodile at the water's edge. Animals you could see from a distance. Animals whose attack postures gave you time to read the situation. The leopard does not do this. Panthera pardus is the most widely distributed large cat on the planet, present in over 70 countries across Africa and Asia. Research published in Frontiers in Conservation Science in 2023, led by Shweta Shivakumar of the Wildlife Conservation Society of India, analyzed 317 leopard attacks in Himachal Pradesh alone between 2004 and 2015. 30 lethal, 287 non-lethal. In that region of northern India, leopards kill more humans annually than all other large carnivores combined. The attacks cluster around residential areas, tea estates, and forest edges. They happen at dusk. They happen at dawn. Many happen while the victim is walking, not crouching, not running, not doing anything that classic predator-prey theory would identify as a threat posture. The leopard is not reacting. It is hunting. And your amygdala, your 300-million-year-old threat detection system, is not calibrated for something that can be within 3 meters of you before you know it's there. Studies of leopard stalking behavior show that a healthy adult leopard can close the final distance of an ambush in approximately 0.3 seconds. Your reaction time, the time between detecting a stimulus and initiating a physical response, is approximately 0.25 seconds under ideal laboratory conditions. In a real encounter, with the cognitive load of surprise and fear, it is substantially longer. The math is not in your favor. What the evolutionary record tells us, through the amygdala, through the fear conditioning research of Arne Oman at the Karolinska Institute, spanning 4 decades of experiments, is that you did not evolve as a predator. You evolved as prey. Your fear responses are not offensive systems. They are damage limitation systems. They were not designed to help you in a confrontation with a large carnivore. They were designed to help you survive long enough to not be the one who was caught. For most of human evolutionary history, that was sufficient. The problem is that you no longer live in that environment. You live in a world where you walk into habitats that used to kill your ancestors, often with no meaningful deterrent and no awareness of what's watching you. The leopard is still there. The orca is still there. The crocodile, whose heart can slow to 2 beats per minute while it waits motionless underwater, is still there. Your amygdala knows this. You have simply learned to override it. But the story of humans and these animals is not only a story of death. It is, in many cases, a story of something stranger, reverence. Consider the hippopotamus. Hippopotamus amphibius kills an estimated 500 people per year across sub-Saharan Africa, making it the deadliest large land animal on Earth. It is almost entirely herbivorous. It does not eat the people it kills. It kills them, in many documented cases, because they crossed its path in the water. Paul Templer learned this on Zimbabwe's Zambezi River in 1996. He was working as a river guide when a bull hippo surfaced beneath his kayak, took him in its jaws, and held him. His torso fully inside the animal's mouth, his legs hanging outside, for approximately 3.5 minutes. The hippo released him only after his colleague Mac, in a nearby kayak, maneuvered close enough for Templer to grab a handle and be dragged free. Templer lost his left arm. He survived. He later described the inside of a hippo's mouth as deep, dank, and the pressure as incredible. Not the jaws themselves, but the compression. The body cavity of a hippopotamus exerts enough force, during a defensive bite, to crush a human femur. And yet in ancient Egypt, the hippopotamus was worshipped. Taaret, the Egyptian goddess of fertility, childbirth, and protection, was depicted with the body of a pregnant hippopotamus. She stood upright, bearing Ankh symbols, facing outward with an expression understood by Egyptians as protective. Mothers in the New Kingdom period, roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE, kept small carved figurines of Taaret beside their beds during labor. The most dangerous large animal in the Nile Delta was also the deity you called upon to protect the most vulnerable moment in a human life. The Egyptians were not naive about hippos. They lived with them. They documented hippo hunts as symbols of royal power. The pharaoh spearing a hippo in the Nile is one of the most repeated images in Egyptian tomb art. But they also saw in the hippo something that demanded a supernatural category, something that was too powerful, too alien, too inexplicably alive for a purely practical relationship. The cassowary has its own ancient relationship with humans. In 2021, archaeologists published findings in the journal PNAS showing that cassowary eggshell fragments from a site in Papua New Guinea dated to approximately 18,000 years ago, representing hatching eggs that were collected and managed by humans. This predates the domestication of chickens by more than 10,000 years. We were managing cassowaries before we managed any other bird on Earth. Not as food, the researchers noted. The evidence suggests the chicks were being raised, not immediately consumed. A dangerous, 60-kilogram bird with disemboweling talents. Being raised by hand. What did the people of Papua New Guinea 18,000 years ago understand about the cassowary that Marvin Hajos, with all of modern horticulture and the San Diego Zoo's website available to him, did not? And then there are the orcas. The name killer whale was coined in the 18th century by sailors who observed them attacking great whales, not humans. Indigenous communities of the Pacific Northwest, who lived alongside orcas for thousands of years, did not use that name. The Haida called them Scanna, supernatural beings capable of crossing between the human and spirit worlds. When an orca died, some traditions held that its spirit transformed into a wolf. When a wolf disappeared into the ocean, it became an orca. These were not metaphors. They were ontological claims. They were statements about what these animals fundamentally are. The Iberian orca subpopulation today contains approximately 35 to 40 individuals. It is critically endangered. The boat ramming behavior began in May 2020, precisely during the period when Atlantic bluefin tuna, the orca's primary prey, became significantly more abundant in the Strait of Gibraltar following years of protected fishing quotas. The orcas were, for the first time in decades, eating well. They had time. They had energy. And 15 of them began systematically dismantling the rudders of sailboats. The IWC report suggested this was play. Perhaps it is. But it is also worth noting that the behavior has now persisted for 5 years, been learned by at least 3 generations of juveniles, and shows no sign of stopping. At some point, play stops being a satisfying explanation. At some point, you have to ask whether the orca has developed an opinion about boats. Here's what we know. The stingray that killed Steve Irwin, Bathatosia brevicida, the short-tail stingray, on September 4, 2006, at Bat Reef, Queensland, did not attack him. It defended itself. Irwin was above it. His shadow fell across it in a way that may have resembled, to the ray's nervous system, the approach of a tiger shark. The ray's tail moved in approximately 0.1 seconds, a reflexive action, faster than decision, older than thought. The barb entered his chest at an angle that placed it directly against his thoracic wall. It pierced his heart. Stingray fatalities are extraordinarily rare. Only around 20 documented cases worldwide since 1945. Irwin had spent his entire career placing himself between dangerous animals and a frightened public, explaining them, defending them, trying to make the world less afraid of the thing it didn't understand. The animal that killed him was not trying to kill him. It was doing what it had always done. It was being itself. There is a version of this story in which the natural world is hostile, in which these animals are dangers to be mapped, contained, managed, and, when necessary, removed. That version is partially true. People die. The data is real. The attacks are documented. But there is another version of this story, in which we are 7 billion humans, spread across every biome on Earth, compressing and fragmenting the habitats of animals that were here before we arrived, in which our presence in their territory is not neutral, in which the orca targeting our rudder, the leopard at the forest edge, the cassowary that did not retreat, are doing exactly what 35 million years of evolution shaped them to do. They are not confused by us. We are confused by them. The Zambezi still runs. The Strait of Gibraltar is still open. The cassowaries are still breeding somewhere. The question isn't whether these animals understand us. The question is whether we ever really understood them.